In addition to adjusting tonality using curves style effects like RGB curves or Luma curve, you can also adjust tonality using numeric values that are controlled by sliders. Now there's some advantages to using the sliders. They're more precise because they're numeric values, and you can keyframe them. But the disadvantages, as I've mentioned before, is that you really can't adjust contrast all that carefully, and you can't control tonality within certain zones, at least just with the sliders. There are secondary color controls that can do that, but we'll talk about them later. But at this point, we're just going to adjust overall tonality, and the two effects that we're going to use that have these slider style controls are RGB color corrector and the fast color corrector. So to follow along, go to Working Files, and go to the Premiere Pro projects, and open up Numeric Controls. We have several clips here with different kinds of tonality issues, and we're going to adjust all of them. First order of business for me is I want to expand the view of this reference monitor here, so I'm going to pull this down a bit like so, and then slide this to the right a bit like that. There we go. Now I want to apply the two color correction effects that we're going to work with here in this lesson to all of these clips. So I just need to marquee select them by just clicking off to one side like this and dragging a marquee around all of them like that. Going over to Effects up here. If you have a custom color correction effect folder, go ahead and open that up. Otherwise, go to Video Effects, go to Color Correction, and then double click on Fast Color Corrector. That'll add it to all of these. Then double click on the RGB color corrector. You could also just drag it over here as well, but double clicking is pretty effective. Now go back to Effect Controls there like that, and deselect these guys by clicking away, and then click on the first one to select it. Now you see we've got the fast color corrector and the RGB color corrector applied to it. We're going to start off working with the fast color corrector. Now I've mentioned earlier that the fast color corrector actually damages video if the video has black areas that are below 0 IRE. This one does not have that, so it's not a problem to use fast color corrector here. So let's take a look at its levels style controls. Let me scroll down here a bit. We've got the three input levels controllers here in one little slider. Input black, gray, and white are all right there. And then the two output levels here are into this one little slider, the output black and output white. A reminder, when you move this little black triangle, you make blacks blacker, you make the dark areas darker. And if you move the white triangle, you make the bright areas brighter or whiter. The output side of things makes white a little bit less white, a little bit grayer. And the other side over here, the black side, takes dark areas and makes them kind of duller. It makes them a little bit more like dark gray. All right, so what we have here is an overexposed clip. And so we have some dark gray areas here, but they're not black. We want to make them black by pulling them down. So we pull them down using the input level controller here for black. I'm going to pull it to the right, and we're going to pull that guy down and have the blacks just begin to touch the 0 IRE line, meaning that the darkest areas are now actually black, which is good. This little area right there is now absolutely black, and this area here is very close to black, and that's good. We want to spread out the tonality values here. Now we want to pull down the highlights right along there, along the sky and the surf there, and make them, instead of pure white, give them some detail in the white and make them just very bright. To do that, I use the output side of things, because they're not going to be as bright now. So I take the output side and pull that down. And there you go. We bring those guys down to the 100 IRE line. Now we have a full range of tonality from 0 to 100, which is what we want to have here. Now, as far as adjusting contrast, where we adjust, let's say, the steepness of the curve, we do that using the gamma controller or the gray controller. It doesn't work as precisely as when you work with the curves, but it works fairly well. We're going to make the darker end of the tonality values here a little bit darker by dragging it to the left just a bit like that. There you go, just a bit. And that gives it a little bit more contrast. All right, let's pull this thing up and turn it off. We'll go on down to the RGB color corrector now. The way we adjust tonality here is with the gamma, pedestal, and gain. So I'm going to open them up so you can see them. The workflow is to do pedestal first, then gain, then gamma. Pedestal moves everything equally. So we want to bring everything down so that the darkest areas become black. So I'm going to pull this guy to the left. That brings them down like so. So we get the darkest areas just touching the 0 IRE line. Now we're going to work on the highlights end here. In this case, we're going to pull them down a bit. So we work with the gain to do that. So I pull the gain down just a touch. There we go, so that the brightest areas just touch the 100 IRE line. Now we've got this full range of tonality. To adjust the gamma or the gray, we take this little slider there and pull it to the left just a little bit to make the darker areas darker. Now we have a fairly good range of tonality there with some contrast thrown in. All right, let's move on to this next clip here. This one is deeply underexposed. You can see that right there. We've got a whole bunch of black areas below 0, so they're pure black with no detail. We have basically no highlights here at all. So we need to bring the blacks up a bit and then bring the highlights way up. Now this is going to be a problem for the fast color corrector because we've got stuff below 0. It hasn't crushed the blacks yet, but it will once we touch the gamma controller. I'll pull this down here. I'm just going to move the gamma slider slightly and watch what happens to the blacks here. Bam, they get crushed. Which means you really can't use this if you want to adjust gamma at all. We're going to do this one more time on a different clip, and you can see there are kind of ways around this. But you can see for the most part, you don't want to adjust clips that are too dark using the fast color corrector if you want to adjust tonality. So I'll just close this one down here and turn it off. That makes things go back to normal there. Now we'll open up the RGB color corrector's three controllers here, gamma, pedestal, and gain. You may notice that the RGB color corrector has a split view %. You can split the view and see how the before and the after looks here inside the screen. I hardly ever use that, but if you want to see how that works, you click on the Show Split View, and it'll be split horizontally or vertically. I'll switch it to vertical here, like that. And I'll make a quick change here so you can see what's going on. See the after here and the before. But for what we're doing here, the split view really isn't all that important, so I'm going to turn that off and reset this whole thing here. First order of business is to lift everything so that the darkest values touch 0. So you've got some detail in the dark areas here instead of no detail at all right now. So I use the pedestal to do that. We lift everything up, like so. And when I let go, sometimes it shifts a little bit. If that happens, you can just change the value here from 0.05 to 0.04 or 0.06. That's one of the things that's nice about these numeric values, is that they're very precise. Now I want to lift up the gain way up. So I'll take the gain here and drag it way to the right there. There we go. And again, if it's not really exactly where you want it, you can always change the numeric value there. And now notice what happens when I do that. It does kind of pull the lower end away. It does make the dark areas a little less dark than they should be. Sometimes you have to kind of go back and forth here. So I'm going to take the pedestal now, pull the pedestal down just a bit like that. Make sure the blacks really are black. And now I'll adjust the gamma just a little bit by pulling this down a bit, just bringing the darker areas down like so. The whole thing moves again, so I need to adjust the gain a little bit. Pull that up. So it's kind of one of these things where you got to go back and forth a little bit until you finally get it exactly as you want. One of the drawbacks of using the RGB color corrector with these three controllers is that sometimes you need to tweak them a little bit as you go along. But there you go, that's how that works there. Let's move on down to this next one here. This one is both under and overexposed, and so again, the fast color corrector will have problems here, but let's just see how it works. I'll pull this thing down. What I want to do is I want to lift up the blacks and pull down the highlights. So I do that with output. I make the black less black, make the highlights a little bit less white. So I do that with the output side of things. So I drag this to the right, that lifts up the blacks. I'm going to pull down the highlights like that. And now, if I'm happy with that, it's fine. But if I want to adjust the gamma, if I want to adjust the contrast a bit by pulling the slider to the left, watch how this guy gets crushed here. Even though we've already adjusted things above 0 IRE, it will crush the blacks once you touch the gamma. That's the one drawback here to the old fast color corrector when you're adjusting tonality. With the RGB color corrector, it'll look like we're going to crush the whites as we move the pedestal around, but it's not really happening. I'll show you what I mean. We'll open up these three here like that. We take the pedestal and lift everything up, and watch how it seems to crush the whites here as we do that. Lift this guy up a little bit like so. And it looks like the whites are getting crushed there, but that's not a problem. We're going to take the gain now and pull them down. You'll see that they reappear nicely there. So we still have detail there in the brightest values. Now we can adjust the gamma a little bit to make it just a little bit darker there. That'll adjust the contrast a little bit there. Again, we can't adjust the contrast as precisely as we can using the Luma curve or the RGB curves effects. We'll go on to the next clip here. This clip is properly exposed, so we want to adjust the gamma only here. We don't need to worry about things that are below 0 IRE there. Not much will happen if we use the fast color corrector. So we can take the gamma here, the gray, slide it to the left just a little bit to give it more contrast. There you go. It did crush the blacks there, but there's so little to be crushed, it didn't make that much difference. Close you down by turning you off like that. Now we'll go to the RGB color corrector and work only with gamma here. Slide it to the left just a little bit. That gives it a little bit more contrast. But once we bring down the gamma, it sort of brings down the gain a bit too. So you need to kind of adjust the gain while you're at it. Down the line here, we've got this night view where these lights are too bright. If you're watching this on an analog TV, there'll be little black dots appearing there around those lights because they're just too bright. We want to pull those guys down. We're not worried about the blacks here, just the whites. Now, if we had curves, we could adjust just this area. But when we work with these sliders, we bring everything down from about 60 IRE up. Pull this thing over here like that. We're going to work with the output highlights here and pull those guys down and watch how basically everything from here to about there will move. We can't really limit ourselves to just the brightest areas. We basically take everything above 50 or 60 IRE and pull that down. We can do this more precisely inside the RGB color corrector and the three-way color corrector by using what's called secondary color correction. I've mentioned that before. We cover secondary later in the course, but secondary is down here in the RGB color corrector, and it's also down at the bottom of the three-way color corrector. When you open that up, just select areas based on Luma and affect only them. So you can do this, but it takes a few more steps. A little bit more difficult than doing it just with a slider like this. So we'll talk about that later in the course. So for now, I want to bring this down using the RGB color corrector. So let me turn off the fast color corrector here. Go down to the RGB color corrector and open up just the gain here. Slide it down to the left a bit. That gets those lights so they're not too bright. Moving on down to this night street scene, it's the same kind of a situation. I'm going to pull those guys down using the fast color corrector again. Sliding the output because we want to make the bright areas a little less bright, like so. And we'll turn this off now and go on down to the RGB color corrector. Work with the gain here. That's the thing that brings down the highlights, like that. And that works pretty easily. Now finally, we're going to the fog here. When you've got fog, lots of times you want to make the contrast less than it was when you shot it. Here we've got some areas that are bright white. Probably don't want them to be bright white. We've got some areas that are almost black here. Probably don't want them to be so black. So I'm going to go over here to the fast color corrector. I'm going to work on the output side of things because we want to make things less black and less white. So I'm going to lift up the blacks a little bit. I'm going to pull down the whites a little bit like this. Reduces the contrast, makes it a little bit foggier. And now I can take the input level gray and pull it to the right instead of the left. I want to reduce the contrast by pulling it to the right a bit like that. That kind of softens things up even more. So if you want to make something look foggier, that's how you do it, kind of the reverse thinking as we've done it before. Turn you off and go on down finally to the RGB color corrector. Open these guys up. We want to lift the pedestal a bit to lift everything up, like so. Now we want to take the gain and bring the top down. And now take the gamma and pull it to the right just a bit to lift up the darker areas to make the contrast a little bit lower there. So I think you can compare the two ways that you adjust tonality, using numeric values that are controlled by sliders, using graphs controlled by the curves, and decide which approach works best for you. I think these sliders are intuitive, they're fairly easy, and they're precise, plus you can keyframe them if you need to do that, whereas the curves give you more control over contrast and over specific areas of tonality. But going down the road, we'll be able to control those specific areas of tonality using secondary color correction methods. So that little extra advantage to the curves kind of goes away, but it is more complex to use the secondary method down the road. Nevertheless, feel free to use either method, the curves method or the numeric values, when you adjust overall tonality.